Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We are excited to be back with you this week for some interesting conversations and a great first-time guest. We will start things off by breaking down further drama surrounding Minneapolis mayor candidate, State Senator Omar Fateh, this time surrounding his threats and denial of threats at the state legislature related to the contentious Uber-Lyft legislation from recent years. Then we are excited to welcome Representative Marion Rarick to the podcast for the first time. Representative Rarick will join us to break down the controversy of the process and nominations of the University of Minnesota Regents by Governor Walz, including a secret letter from DFL legislators seemingly undermining the typical legislative process. Next, we will bring our conversation back to Minneapolis, which is once again a beacon of how not to conduct yourself in politics. Minneapolis council member using vulgar language against sitting Mayor Jacob Frey. Lastly, we will round out the show by discussing President Trump's new quest to end mail-in ballots. Thank you for joining us today and enjoy the show. So, Michael, we are back at it with all things Minneapolis mayoral candidates, but this time kind of focusing on Senator Fateh's work in the legislature as we spoke at length over many episodes about the Uber-Lyft drama from recent years. It was passed by the legislature, vetoed by Governor Walz. Minneapolis moved it. There was a law change. Frey vetoed. The council overrode it. It went back. There was a legislative fix. So much time and energy was spent on this. But what we're focusing on today are new emails that were uncovered this week, showing that Senator Fateh, who was the chief author of this Uber-Lyft legislation, threatened to block 2023 budget bills unless his bill was for increased pay and benefits for the drivers was passed. Also controversial because he denied doing so when asked about this previously. What's your initial take when you heard this? Is this normal? Is this going too far?
Well, a couple things. I want to plug our previous episode that we did on this, a few episodes, and we'll make sure to link to those episodes and those guests that we have on to discuss this issue. But at the time, Fateh was very clear that he didn't do this. And then for having to come out later, I think we're in a new era of Trump. And I think in the new era of Trump that folks, I think politicians have become, their fidelity to the truth has become less and less. And so I think what's challenging about this is that he went out and said that he didn't do it, and then the emails show that he did. And that's I think the challenge. I think what we also have, where it factors in the race, particularly in the race for mayor, is what he chose, what he did, what was the ramifications of this. And that the fact that he was so direct in saying that, I mean, basically he was putting the entire DFL agenda at risk. And I think that the Uber-Lyft bill was a very controversial piece of legislation. It impacted what was going on at the city council level in Minneapolis and involved city politics and also legislative politics. The fact that he was willing to block it based on that and was going to hold up the entire DFL agenda, in retrospect, I'm unclear as to why he wouldn't have just been honest about that, because now it becomes more of a controversy. Now it's more of a discussion about his lack of candor and honesty than taking a principled position on which to die on the Hill. Now, let me say this also is that legislature, there's a lot of gamesmanship that goes on behind the scenes. It's the classic smoke-filled rooms. So, I'm sure this type of stuff has happened before where people have, threatened, if I don't get my way, if A happens, then I'm going to do B. That probably happens quite a bit. What's unusual about this situation is that he said he didn't do it when in fact he did, and there's an email to prove it, and it's coming out in the context of the mayoral race in Minneapolis, where I think his leadership is going to be scrutinized by the voters, as is the incumbent, as is the other candidates that are running. And I don't think this is a good look for him. I just don't. He can try to spin it as, I was fighting for my agenda. That's fine. Why didn't you say that at that time? Why didn't you just come out and say it at that time? Your take.
I mean, I completely agree. I think it's one thing if you are going to stand on business and make arguments such as this, go and say, I this is ridiculous. This is really important. We need to get this done. If you want my help and support on other bills, I'm going to do this. We need to get this happen or get this done. That said, planning or threatening to take down the entire budget. I mean, as a reminder, this is when there was a 1-seat majority for Democrats, right?
Great
So
point.
this hinges the entire state government budget, the 2023 budget bills hinged on his participation voting with the Democrats. And he was planning, threatening, saying, I will not vote for you. I will vote with the Republicans if I don't get my way, is a little bit of kindergarten, tantrum, right? So I'm all about the gamemanship. I mean, there's politics of politics happens. These kind of arguments are made, compromise is made, but just because you don't get your way, it is not a way to conduct business. And I think that are, in addition to the, like you said, the honesty, transparency things are major arguments that the Frey campaign has and will continue to hammer on in the mayoral race, because those are things. So if you just don't get your way, I mean, again, we know that the city council is likely a little bit more on Fateh's side than it was on Frey's side, but you have to work with others. You have to have compromise. You have to be willing to give a little to get a little. And so it's just a little much. And the fact that it boggles my mind that in this day and age, my mom always said, parents always find out. Reporters and the public always find out too, right? So like, you have emails, and from what I gathered from the emails, this was sent possibly to the entire DFL caucus. That includes staff, that includes leadership, that includes all of the members. He wrote, it was a very lengthy email. Tori Van Oud from Axios has the email on Twitter. She wrote, part of it in bold was, I want to make it very clear today, as I've already notified leadership, that I will not be voting on any conference report on the floor until this passes on the floors of both the House and the Senate. He did not mince words. And so the fact that he then denied that he threatened this is just mind-boggling to me.
Yes, a couple points. If you're going to threaten, I don't know what it is about this new generation, but don't do it in writing. Do it in person. Verbalize it. Okay. Then it can be, well, they heard one thing. I heard another thing. Do it that way. But this was in writing. Number two, if you're going to go to the steps to put it in writing and demand that declaration of, in essence, you're declaring, in essence, war on what's happening in the legislation, go out there on the floor of the Senate and state your position to the entire legislature and to the public so they know. Again, I understand, I'm not trying to be naive here. This type of stuff happens all the time at the legislatures where there's jockeying and stuff going on. That kind of general I want this, you get this. If A doesn't happen, B will happen. That happens all the time. What's unusual about this is he took this position, he put it in writing, and then denied that he did it. And then he had all these opportunities by which to go to the mic, grab a microphone, has a tremendous platform to make the case as to why this was so important to do and why what is so critical. It honestly, at the time, it could have been a test of his leadership.
Right.
And he could have said, this is so important to me. This is but he didn't choose to do that. Chose specifically not to. He chose to be dishonest about what he had claimed, even though it was in writing to all of his colleagues. And so it really calls into question his honesty, his judgment, his temperament. And I also think it calls into question his overall political acumen. And I think what's important, and I know we're somewhat Republicans, but neither of us live in Minneapolis. I keep going back to this point of we still have a right to discuss, debate, and comment on what's going on in Minneapolis, because it is the largest city in the state, and having someone who's endorsed by the DSA with the positions that they have, and then going out and acting in this type of way, I think really calls into question what Minneapolis can be. We've had some great discussions with some guests, Democrats and Republicans, about what's going on in Minneapolis. And I think this is just another example of why Fateh's leadership is under scrutiny, as it should be. It's an
Mhm.
election. That's what we should be happening. And in this case, the scrutiny has exposed, I think, a real character flaw that he has. And I think it's going to be an issue in the campaign, an ongoing issue in the campaign.
And we'll be here to cover it. I never thought we'd be so diving so deep in Minneapolis city elections, but I'm loving it. I do want to say one thing. When I was doing some prep for the show, and was looking for the articles surrounding this issue, one of the top 3 articles that comes up when you search Omar Fateh is an article that's titled, "Will Omar Fateh Become America's Most Radical Mayor?"
Oof.
And Minnesota and Minneapolis are not the most radical, saying there are some definitely radical policies and constituencies for sure. But we're not San Francisco. We're not, Portland. We're not New York. We're not some of these cities. And for that, it's very very shocking that may be the case should he be successful. So we will continue to chat about this race and the ongoing drama between Frey and Fateh and the other candidates involved, and just a couple months away.
That's right.
Also, somewhat related, that we will be chatting here with our next guest. We'll be hearing Fateh's name again. We are excited to welcome for the first time Representative Marion Rarick to the show. Thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
So you are the co-chair of the House Higher Education Committee, and that committee, one of the things that we've been seeing coming out of the last week is Governor Walz named 4 appointments to the U of M, the University of Minnesota's Board of Regents. There is certainly a lot swirling around this that we're going to break down, but before we get into that, can you give us a quick minute, 30 seconds breakdown of what is the Board of Regents and what do they do?
That's a really good question. So they run the University of Minnesota. The University of Minnesota is a land grant institution. They predate statehood. So constitutionally, they have their own governing board. We don't get to tell them what to do, how to do it, how to jump. We, the legislature, elect regents, a board of 12, to oversee all of the operations of the University of Minnesota. We don't have that ability to do that. We can't tell them what to do or what not to do. They are not a state agency. They are not under the tutelage of the governor. And I've had some people say, oh, well, it's just like a commissioner. I'm like, no, it's completely different. So the Board of Regents run the University of Minnesota.
Right. And so typically appointments to this board, so there was 4 open on the board of 12. Typically those appointments come from the legislature. And you mentioned in your press release that this time around, the legislature had failed to fill these 4 vacancies. And you're in the first time since you're serving, decade plus serving in the legislature, that was the case. So you guys held committee hearings, vetted candidates, recommended candidates, and it stalled. My understanding stalled because of the Democrats. Explain how that went down.
In all of state history, there were only 4 times in the entire history that we, the legislature, did not elect regents. It went to the governor. So this is only the 5th time in all of state history. What happened is we have a completely tied House of Representatives, 67-67. There is a 1-vote advantage in the Senate. The Democrats have a 1-vote advantage. So when you elect regents, you have to have 101 to win. The Democrats have exactly 101. And if you look at their politics, they have gone sideways. So you've got, I guess I would call them moderates. I don't know if they're really moderates anymore. And then the far left, and they cannot agree on anything. So I don't think they could agree on this. What happened is we had 14 candidates that came through to the legislature from the RCAC, which is an advisory committee staffed with members of the public, some of the legislators. My husband's on it, so he really got in and dug into it. So Senator Rarick is on it. My brother is on it. So, there's a few legislators on it. They sent 14 candidates to the legislature. When we went to the joint committee, one of them, Madeline Rowe, dropped because she was like, I don't like this process. She was a student, if you could tell. I don't like this process and I'm not going to participate. So she dropped. So then we were down to 13. The Democrats voted through 4. The Republicans voted through 4. So we had 8. Now, the ones that the governor picked, Ellen Lugar, did not even make it through the joint committee, right? The one candidate did. So at least Kosar Mohammed made it through the whole process. But then he completely threw out all of the work of the RCAC committee, of the House and Senate, and he started completely over with an application process. And he picked two people from that application process, two of which I've never heard before. Now, if I was a Democrat, I would know one of them very well because he is a major Democrat donor. There is no question how big of a donor he is.
Yeah, so to that point, one of these Democrat donors that you mentioned, Samuel Hines, has contributed $664,000 to Democrat campaigns since 1989, including more than $17,000 to Walz's campaign since 2008, and $6,600 to Harris in 2023. I mean, that is not a small amount of dollars. It certainly raises a lot of questions of the pay to play. And this was one, correct me if I'm wrong, but that did not come through your committee, right? Did not come through the legislative process.
Samuel Hines did not come through any process at the legislature. I didn't know that name from Adam. Again, if I was anybody in the Democrat Party, of course I would know that name because he gives to anybody and everybody. In fact, that number that you quoted was something I had found on open sources. And when I looked at the FEC, it had 2025 numbers, and it's even more than that. So I actually, it's shocking, honestly. So to the Harris campaign, there's a total of 38,300. So some of that came in 25. And then they have this new grassroots fund called the Democratic Grassroots Victory Fund. And in 2025 alone, he donated 44,300. So that number that you quoted was prior to 25, and he's donated to dozens of candidates, even outside of Minnesota. So he donates across like 10 other states, and he is a major state or a national Democrat donor.
I mean, it seems with those numbers you throw out, it looks like it goes to almost $750,000 they're donating. And so, I mean, it just is shocking to me that not only, understandably, there's obviously, if the legislature fails, it goes to the governor. That certainly happens. As you mentioned, just very minimal, very few times here. But it was shocking to me in particular that, so in addition to, you guys did the work, as you mentioned, you spoke to House staff, everybody, everything was ready to go prior to session adjourning, did not happen. And then 2 days after session ended, Representative Dan Wolgamont, who is your co-chair on the House Higher Ed Committee, and Senator Omar Fateh, who we have been discussing quite a bit, who is the chair of the Senate Higher Ed Committee, sent a letter to Governor Walz urging him to, quote, act now and appoint the regents themselves. Now, talk to us a little bit about how you found that out, and have you talked to them? What they declined to talk to the press on this, but what's with this?
Yeah, so that was really disappointing. The only reason I knew anything about it is because when Commissioner Olson called me in June after special session was over and we failed to elect, even though I continue to push, I pushed so hard that Representative Robbins and I literally withheld our signatures on the conference committee report during regular session to say we will not sign this conference committee report. Okay, so you know what that is. The conference committee report is like the final bill. We agreed to all the components of it, but we refused to sign it so that we could bring it to the House floor to pass it until the Democrats agreed to do the joint convention, to elect regents. And they still wouldn't do it. So what happened is, while we were still in session, yes, as soon as Carrie Heintzman was elected to the Senate, we had a full, House and Senate again. That same day that she was sworn in, Senator Fateh got a hold of me and said, hey, can we do the joint convention? And I said, sure. So I went to Pat Murphy, who's our chief clerk, and I said, okay, so I guess we're ready to do this. Are you ready? He goes, oh yeah, we just need a few hours to set the chamber up because they have to set up chairs and things like that, get a few things in order. I said, great. So I went back to my office and we started to draft a letter. So the legal process of how it starts is the three chairs have to sign a letter. So we drafted that. And immediately Senator Fateh signed that letter. And then I got a hold of Wolgamont, wouldn't answer me, didn't answer my texts, wouldn't answer my phone calls. And then my staff started calling his staff, wouldn't answer, nothing. Just got ghosted, right? So then finally he comes and talks to me in the retiring room, which is like the room right off the back of the chamber. And he says, okay, so we, House Democrats, want to know who you, Republicans, want to elect in this process. And I said, well, it's the same ones that we voted through. There's no secret here. We don't have any secret agenda. Okay, so he took that back to his caucus and he said, here are the candidates that the Republicans want. Then he came back to me again. We had another conversation and he says, well, I talked to my caucus and they basically said, hell no, we're not doing it. So thus that ended any ability, because without his signature on that letter, we can't start the legal process to even call the joint convention to bring in the Senate, because we have to invite the Senate into our chamber.
Representative, if you could for a minute, the state government has a number of great procedures and processes and events that they occur. Describe to our listeners about the joint session. You discussed it a bit. The Senate comes into the House chamber. They're all together. Describe a little bit of that process, because there's history in this. And one of the things, aside from, I think, the House Democrats not being honest brokers in this situation, the other thing is there's an element of transparency and openness. Describe a bit to our listeners the process of selecting the regents in terms of the House. I mean, the two bodies come together. It's not the House and the Senate. They come into one. Describe a little bit and kind of what Minnesotans missed out on.
Yeah, thank you. So it's a public process. We meet in the House chamber because, frankly, it's a bigger chamber. We invite the Senate in. So the Senate all comes in, all the senators. We set up special chairs. And then our chief clerk will actually manage the whole process, which is why I went to him first. So what we do is we as members put names into nomination. So say we have the student at large seat. So then you would have members get up and say, I would put into nomination Kosar Mohammed, and so on, so on, so on. So you would have as many as people want to nominate. It doesn't have to be just 2, it can be 4, it can be whatever. And you don't have to pick somebody that was already vetted, which is a bone of contention sometimes with members, but that's the rules. So then when we go to vote, we do it seat by seat. So it would be student at large, then the 5th congressional, and then the 2 at large, but 1 at a time. What we do is it's a voice vote. So you get to hear Representative Rarick votes Mohammed, right? So you hear all 201 of us voice vote exactly who we want to vote for that's in that seat. So it's very transparent. This was not transparent. Oh, and also I should say that the RCAC meetings are transparent in public. When we had the joint committee, that was transparent. We had the Regents candidates in front of us and they answered our questions, and then we voted publicly. What happened with Walz was not transparent one bit.
Just one last point, Becky, I want to make it. I think one of the most fascinating stats is how infrequent this has happened, how little this has happened. And I think one of the things that I think that the House Republicans have done a tremendously good job on is bringing transparency in a variety of ways. And this was denying Minnesotans an opportunity to see this process. And it's been done overwhelmingly. And I think and to have it done this way and with some of the selections, I think calls into a lot of questions. But I think it's important that Minnesotans have trust in their government. And seeing the process unfold, seeing the Senate come into the House chamber and having to do that roll call, there is a pomp and circumstance to that I think Minnesotans deserve to see. And it was very unique with the opportunities that I've had to see it. It's a very unique procedure. It's done very frequently. It's sad that it was done in this particular way, because I do believe that Minnesotans lose out when we don't get to see the kind of the levers of government moving. And it's just disappointing that it didn't happen this time.
Representative, maybe I'm missing something, and maybe it's just how the Democrats did this, but wouldn't you said, the DFL caucus came back and said, we don't like the Republicans' choices here, but couldn't they just then not support them, right? Like you said, you go to the House floor, Republicans vote for your 4, Democrats vote for their 4, they've got one more member. Isn't that how legislature's supposed to work, right? They have more people, so they could have gone their thing, but you guys still went through the process. Am I missing something this way, or is it just that sketchy of how they went about this?
It is literally that sketchy. So yes, they had the votes.
Wow.
They had 101. if they all voted for the same person. Thus is the problem. Now, I told you that
Sure.
Senator Fateh and Wolgamott sent the letter. So those were not they're voted through candidates that came through the joint committee, which is odd, right? Because they both chaired that joint committee and they both orchestrated who was going to be sent from the Democrats through to the legislature as a whole. So those names don't even match. When I look at the names, they wanted the names that went to the governor. They wanted 3 students and then Ellen Lugar. They did not vote for Ellen Lugar. Now, she's probably going to be great. I don't know. But they didn't vote for Ellen Lugar. She didn't make it through the joint committee process. We voted for one of the students because we have to vote for one of the students. And so they added that student to their list. And then they voted through Dylan Young in the student seat. And then they moved Kosar Muhammad to the 5th congressional seat. So they had already voted through 2 of the students. And I had heard, I don't know if this is true, they actually wanted to elect 4 students. 4 students. I think that's irresponsible.
And then, so Walz then gets this letter, ends up going with 2 of their 4 now new, one of which is a kind of a new, not voted through, like you said, the process, and then 2 of his own, correct?
Yes. So he pulls in Ellen Lugar when the Democrats did not vote for her during the joint convention or joint committee. But then Fateh and Wolgamott add her to the letter, say, oh yeah, we didn't really, publicly vote for her, but, put her in now. And that letter was not public. The only reason that letter became public is because a public data request had to be made because it was sent to both the commissioner and to the governor. And that's the only reason this letter is public. And then I asked the commissioner months ago, can you let me know who those 4 were? And he forgot. And so then he called me again and said, well, I just want to let you know that the governor has picked his 4 regents. And I'm letting you know before it hits the press. And I said, great. Can you send me that letter that you said you were going to send me months ago? And the letter was dated 2 days after we ended regular session.
Oh.
And timeline reminder is before a June special session. So that letter was sent, could have been called up, could have been added to the agenda for that special session, but wasn't. I mean, we're not here to speculate intent, but that's also what we're here to do. So it's clear that whether it was driven by Wolgamott and Fateh or Walz or whoever was pulling the strings on this, there was a desire to have this chosen by Governor Walz and not through the legislative process.
Absolutely. And I think it's disingenuous at best that Fateh now is crying wolf, saying, oh, I can't believe that you didn't elect the people, or excuse me, that you didn't appoint the people that we put on that letter. That would have been for the best for Democrat priorities. I'm like, the only reason he's mad is because the governor only picked 2 that were on his list from his secret letter and not all 4.
Help me understand a bit, because as you said, it would have been in an open, transparent process. I mean, ultimately, the only thing that they've created here, I think, is an unforced error on themselves, because I think that it's very clear this process was transparent all along. What I'm curious about is what's the need for the subterfuge? What was the need for the conspiracy? What was their incentive to do this? Because to me, I don't see the upside. I legitimately don't see any upside for them other than they get their appointments, because the approach of this is so methodical. It's so transparent. And I was reading the article, I read the letter and saw the work. It seems to me that this was just a real power play.
That's what it looks like, right? And I think that they're mad now because the governor did his own power play and put his own cronies in. Samuel Hines has been donating to Democrats since 1989. He is a known commodity.
Yep.
I don't know. It hurts my head to think about how Democrats think, honestly. So I don't think that way. It's really hard for me I'm very open, honest, and transparent myself. And I'm like, I don't understand what they were doing.
One of the things that Becky and I have talked a lot about, and we've tried to champion, is Republicans and Democrats. We understand there needs to be differences, but at the state legislature, we'd like them to work together. How does this type of tomfoolery, which is one of my favorite words, I wonder, how does this level of tomfoolery hurt the relationship that exists between legislators? Because people come from different different political parties, but at the end of the day, you're supposed to work together. And this has to, in some way, frost the relationship a bit because they weren't transparent.
Well, it does make it difficult. I've been there 13 years, as you know, and so I work with anyone willing to work with me. I, I've had this great legislative time of literally sitting side by side with my Democrat co-author on a bill to present the bill to the committee. I have done it half a dozen times. I don't know, I've never seen it done before in my committees, but I do it quite often. I've sat with Khalid Scherr, with Heather Keeler, even with Athena Hollins, with Kelly Moeller. So it's not like I can't work across the aisle. I do, and I work on really hard things and get really hard legislation passed, protecting victims of violence, protecting children from violence. Really, really hard things, ending child marriage, all kinds of horrible things in the state that I can't believe we still had on the books. So I can work across the aisle. I have worked across the aisle. It's going to be a little bit challenging to work with Wolgamott moving forward because he hasn't picked up my phone calls. He hasn't answered my text messages. He does not like it, I'm sure, that I'm telling the story of what happened, but that's what I do. I tell you what actually happened because I have integrity and I'm going to tell you exactly what happened.
Well, and we just, like we talked about just before this, transparency and integrity are all we can really look to and hold our elected officials to. And if you don't have that, you really don't have much. I want to wrap by quoting one quote from your press release. You said in there, not one Republican-backed finalist was appointed despite a tied House. This is a blatant example of Democrats using partisan politics to override what's best for all Minnesotans. And I think that's a really important thing right now, is this is not just Democrats using tomfoolery and using rules to kind of get around things. We are tied. I mean, it's a tied House. There's a vote majority in the Senate. If they still could have gotten together, rallied the troops, and gotten their folks to all vote for the same person, go through the legislative process, but they did not. And Governor Walz then also went around all of the Republican-backed finalists, which is, from my perspective, not very one Minnesota, not very cohesive of when we look at the makeup and breakdown of the legislature at this time. Thank you for everything and for, shedding some light on this. Any final words, anything we didn't hit on this topic? Because I think it's really important to share.
Yeah, I think the one last thing I would say is that we had a really great candidate, John Gibbs. So he spent so much time. So comes through corporate world, both lawyer and really good with numbers. So that's a very strange mix. But he came to committee hearings. He was actually, when he came through the RCAC process, was the highest vote getter, including Ryan Winkler. So even Ryan Winkler voted for this guy. And I'm shocked that the governor wouldn't pick somebody with so many skills and talents that could really move this university forward. He is dug in deep and did a lot of things. So there were opportunities missed. I'm really disappointed that the governor just kind of threw it all out and started over.
Well, we thank you so much for being here today and explaining this, and we hope to have you back sometime. Thank you again.
Thanks for having me. Would love to come back.
Becky, before we move on to our next subject, we just finished an interview with Representative Rarick about the Regent selection process. Your take on the interview?
It was great. I think it's also kind of funny, real quick, a personal plug. We had David Fitzsimmons on last week, who I first started working with in Emmer 2010. Representative Rarick, before she was in the legislature, and I worked on Emmer 2010 on the campaign together as well. So it's been fascinating and so fun to watch her move into the legislature and become such a great leader on everything. But to see her leadership on this, and again, I think it tracks just as well with the first topic that we hit on here, of shedding light to things that people are thinking that they can get away with here. I mean, the fact that this process exists, and like she mentioned, this is only the fifth time it didn't proceed through the legislative process, and that they were ready to go, that Wolgamott said no thanks. Then 2 days after session, they sent the letter. Again, something that they could have worked and fine-tuned and brought back up in special session. Didn't happen. And then Walz moved. I mean, it just seems like there's, again, some, like you said, tomfoolery here, right? This is pretty shady. This isn't the way it's supposed to go. Of course, there is a process for if the legislature does not complete their work on this. But two of the individuals not even coming through the committee process, not even being vetted, not even being gone through the scrutiny that this committee and convention is supposed to happen at the state legislature, just doesn't pass the smell test.
It doesn't. It doesn't. By the way, I love an episode where I get to use one of my favorite words, tomfoolery, second only to monkey shines. Monkey shines is also one of my favorite words. Let me just say this. That's our first interview with Representative Rarick. Here's what I would say to talk about her for a second. I wish we didn't have waste, fraud, and abuse issues and these types of transparency issues at the state capitol. But boy, oh boy, is she good at breaking this stuff down, particularly on the breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, but just in general in committee and at the legislature. I think she is fantastic at taking complex issues. And I've watched some of the committees that she's on, and particularly on the fraud prevention committee, when she's been questioning people that have been called to testify in front of the committee, she does a fantastic job of asking, I think, precise, knowledgeable, informed, very pointed questions, and then has the ability to dial back and then explain to, I think, average Minnesotans like me who don't know the subjects as well as she does, why it's important and why it's relevant. And she just did I think, in precision surgical process, went through the region selection process and took something that vast majority of Minnesotans don't know about it and made a very clear point as to why it's relevant, why we should be concerned, why the process failed, and how we can do it better. And that is incredibly powerful right now.
Absolutely.
Particularly as you and I have tried to do on this podcast, highlight people who are such good messengers, even if we don't agree with them on all the issues. But on this subject, I thought she just nailed it in terms of just explaining things. And one of the things that I really have started to see more of that as we've done this podcast over the years is I like the people who can, as you've discussed, tell stories and explain this to us. And she told a really important chain of events in a format that I think average Minnesotans like me, who aren't as smart as she is and understand the process as well as she does, can understand. And having the ability for people to communicate that way, I think is so important because people can get lost in the weeds on this stuff. And to have someone like her who can just explain it and for lack of a better phrase, dumb it down for people like me so I can understand it, I think that makes her an effective communicator, an effective legislator. And it's great that she's there. I think if you're someone who's looking at the Republican bench or team that exists in the state, boy, you have to be happy with the work that she's doing at the legislature. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw her for statewide office someday.
Completely agree. I mean, especially when you're able to shed light on things, make it so accessible to every reader, to every listener. Glad she's there fighting the good fight and will continue to hopefully be there or in office elsewhere for the foreseeable future.
Yes, and I'm sure you have some witty transition scheduled to the next subject. So I don't know if you want to take it on, go right ahead.
In the opposite light,
knew
somebody who you don't want in public office, we are going to be turning back to Minneapolis and talking about a little tomfoolery from this weekend. So we had this weekend, there was an Uptown music festival. Council member and Council Vice President Aisha Chughtai spoke on stage at this event. She is running for re-election and has since endorsed Omar Fateh with some very strong words. She was on video saying, "We are going to transform this city." I'm going to use some abbreviations here. F Jacob Frey, F fascism, and F Donald Trump. Now, those Fs are very expletive swear words here. This is not something she was embarrassed about. This is not like caught on camera and, was busted saying this. She shared this video on Instagram herself. She was proud of it. Obviously, no surprise that it has since been denounced, obviously, by Jacob Frey himself, which I'll come back to. She has an opponent in her re-election campaign for Ward 10 in the city council race. Her opponent, Lydia Millard, said, "I believe you can be tough without being toxic," which let's just chat about that quote for a second, because I know nothing about Lydia versus Aisha's personal politics in this race. So this is politics aside, but I think that comment, wrap that up and put a little bow on it, right? You can be tough without being toxic should be something that we all have in our back pocket of how to treat other people, how to on the street, how to conduct ourselves in politics, how to in a variety of aspects of life. You can be tough without being toxic. And this is just so unnecessary of a way to conduct yourself of a sitting city council member, a sitting vice president of the council. What do you think?
What do I think? Here's my take. First of all, I want to disclose, in the interest of transparency, I'm a huge swearer. I swear very frequently, particularly on Viking Sundays, but I am a big swearer. I try not to do it on the podcast, although we've had some pretty the occasional foul episode, but I'm a swearer. I'm not a swearer in public, on stage, and I certainly am not. And so there's a part of this that concerns me. And here's what concerns me. I think we need to recognize that Minnesota has changed. In the aftermath of what's happened with Speaker Meredith Hortman, her family, the attacks on Senator Hoffman and his family, we are at I wouldn't say we're at a crossroads because we've passed that point. We just have to expect more. And going out with that level of toxicity in this environment, I don't think is good. As much as I am a swearer, I would not, if I was an elected official, go out and use that type of language doing stuff. This isn't about her being a woman. This isn't about her being in Minneapolis. This is just about, I think I have concerns with this. I have concerns because of the climate that we're in. As you said, this wasn't a caught on camera moment. This wasn't like this is a gotcha moment. She proudly posted this. And I just think we should expect better. Particularly, we should have expected better before the tragic events of the summer happened. But now, in particular in the aftermath, I just wish we could talk about politics and expect more from our politicians without having to use this level of toxicity. It's dangerous. It's demeaning. I don't like this type of rhetoric. I just don't think it's helpful to the political process. And I think we have to be very careful in this state and I think every politician, whether it's a nonpartisan office, whether it's a partisan office, everyone in the state has a responsibility, I think, to tone down the rhetoric. You can be tough without being toxic. That quote from Lydia Millard is a great quote. You can be that way. You don't have to say F this and F that, particularly to the politicians, and amp people up that way with that level of toxicity. It's a tough word to say, toxicity, but it's an important word because we're just in a dangerous time right now. And I just think there's a whole variety of words in the English language that you can use to make the same point and to be as passionate and upset without dehumanizing people in this way. This is kind of a plea to everyone to can't we just be better about how we talk about our political opponents?
Completely agree. Since sitting members of the council have denounced this statement, an action by the council vice president, and then there was a tweet. Darwin Forsyth, who works for mayor, spokesperson for Mayor Frey, had tweeted. He's been on our show a number of times. Tweeted, "Can you imagine the utter meltdown that would be happening here if Mayor Frey had said F Aisha Chughtai and called her a fascist?" And it is true too, right?
Yep.
I mean, this is where we have that double standard. If the roles were reversed, she would be one of, and rightly so, had the roles been reversed and the mayor said this, would be so offended and such an uproar. But we got to have, eliminate that double standard here. It's inappropriate across all things for Jacob Frey, for Donald Trump. I mean, I think we can all agree that we don't like fascism, but there's a better way to get the message across. And again, it's at an Uptown Music Festival. I have to imagine this is not a 21 plus event. I mean, maybe it was, but just inappropriate in any sort. And again, like you said, our elected officials are folks that we've discussed a lot, believe should be held to a higher standard. They're role models. They're they're individuals people look up to and emulate and want to. And if you look to an elected official and a vice president on the city council in the biggest city in the state, and she's conducting herself this way, others are going to say, well, I can do it too. And it's just, we need to change things. We need to do better. she obviously has been successful in her career, has done good things for the policy, for her policies, not my policies. But sh- just come on, let's all right, left, center, do better and take this stuff away because I just can't handle it anymore, even though it makes for some entertaining reading.
And it makes for good podcast content.
Sure does.
I don't want to sound like the Grandpa Simpson angry old man shaking his fist at the cloud, but I just want things to get better.
Yeah.
And what I mean by better is I know there are substantive policy debates that we need to have in this state. Have those debates, have that passion. But what I worry about is someone seeing this, hearing it, watching it, and thinking, oh, that's the way we can talk to our elected officials. That's the way we can talk to people. And that's the way we can interact. And that's what politics is all about. I just wish we could do better. And I think Darwin made a great point. Darwin made a great point about imagine if the roles were reversed. And we would be right to criticize the mayor had he done that. I think it also goes down to one of the issues as I've been following the race is about the dynamics between members of the city council and just there is I understand that there's a passion about issues. And one of the kind of games that people play is, well, if I'm angry, you shouldn't be questioning why I'm angry. Why aren't you angry? All that type of stuff. I'm not going to play that game. I'm not going to play the game of they're angry, you should be too, and all that type of stuff. What I'm just talking about is I want government to work well, and I'd like the people who come in from different agendas with different perspectives to just treat each other better. Because we have horrible, horrible examples in this state of how a toxic political environment can lead to literally life and death matters. And I think we all have a responsibility to do better. We all have a responsibility, whether you're soil and water, whether you're a city council member, whether you're a statewide elected official or everyone has a responsibility. And I hope that there is a passionate issue-based campaign in the city of Minneapolis, but I just wish some of the rhetoric would get toned down, particularly from this council member.
And maybe we do a show on this in the future of some of those positive ways, because this is something I think that we see a lot from, or at least in my time in the last decade in Republican politics, and is Minnesota Republican voters have wanted that fighter, right? They want a candidate who's going to fight Governor Walz, who's going to fight Tina Smith and Amy Klobuchar and Angie Craig and that. And so we've talked a lot about the messaging of how to articulate that messaging of I'm a fighter, I'm going to stand up and fight the good fight. So maybe in a future show, we come back and chat through some of those positive messages and positive ways of articulating that, because I think it is a message that needs, that folks want to hear, especially in this day and age. They want somebody, like you said, to fight for them and on behalf of them and for policies and electeds that are going to move us all forward. And there are good ways to do that. And so I'm going to put a pin in that because there are some good ways to point to, and hopefully some this election cycle from both sides. So, but moving on to our last topic of the day is another one I didn't have on my bingo card for 2026. This week on on Truth Social, Trump claimed that voting by mail is a scam that Democrats allow to cheat. He wrote that an executive order is being written to by the best lawyers in the country to end mail-in ballots because they are corrupt. Went on to claim that they are the only way Democrats can get elected. And let's chat a little bit through this, because this has been something that for the last few election cycles has been really a big topic of conversation. Trump was really against mail-in voting in 2020. We had the COVID pandemic, and this is something where there was a lot more mail-in voting because of certain restrictions in places by different states. A lot of states in Minnesota, there was a lot of different orders that were pushed through to change how voting was conducted, and that's something that we saw across the nation. Trump, like many, believe that they lost the 2020 election because of things like mail-in voting and quote unquote fraud that they speculate happened in 2020. And now in 2024, we saw a big push by Republicans for mail-in voting. They clearly saw that there were a lot of folks who embraced that. And if we're going to keep up, that we should embrace the times as well. So in 2024, Trump pushed a lot of mail or vote however you can possible. Vote absentee, vote in person, just vote, right? In fact, the RNC and Republican campaigns spent tens of millions of dollars on this. In Pennsylvania, in particular, state data shows that GOP voters accounted for 32% of mail in ballots in 2024 when Trump won the state, up 25% from 2020 when he narrowly lost to Joe Biden. So let's point real quick to that, too. Obviously, it's not just benefiting Democrats, it's getting more people to vote. And that bump was after Republicans spent $16 million promoting mail-in voting in Pennsylvania. In total, 43% of the votes cast in 2020 were on mailed ballots compared to just 30% in 2024. So it has kind of right-sized itself a little bit from 2020. But before we get into Trump's claims on this, I want to get your thoughts and vision on, do you like mail-in ballots? Do you like that this has been more embraced? Do you like that Republicans decided in 2024 to push this forward, something Democrats have been doing for quite a while?
I do not subscribe to election conspiracy theories. There is an element of fraud in every election that has happened. The system is not 100% airtight. It is abundantly clear that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election fairly. There is no evidence that there was any form of widespread cheating that cost him the presidency at all. We've had Secretary of State Steve Simon on this podcast, and I am convinced, and I stand by my position, that he is a great arbiter and a great umpire to oversee, to the degree which his office helps coordinates and facilitates elections because they're run at the county level. I think he's doing a great job. I think that now, that being said, we have mail-in balloting in this state. You're not going to change that. Contrary to what the president says, you're not going to change that. And so I think the challenge is going to be is to go out there and stake the claim that there's inherently something wrong with mail-in balloting, I think is going to be a problem. And I think that Republicans in this state have to learn how to win elections. Voters can vote in a variety of ways. They can vote absentee, they can vote early in person, they can vote on election day, and they can vote in mail. And Republicans have to think of ways in which and have to understand those types of operations. I honestly was stunned that after a meeting with Vladimir Putin, by the way, I think we're missing that point. This was a meeting, this came about after a meeting with Vladimir Putin. So the genesis for this idea, it came from Vladimir Putin saying mail-in balloting is wrong, and now Republicans are going to embrace this across the state. I got to tell you something, or across the country. Republicans invested aggressively in mail-in programs. And this has been some voting by mail programs all across this country. To see the president undermine that and try to push that and try to dispel that, boy, I think throws a real wrench in the election system. I think Republicans will get into some of the process, but if I was a Republican running for statewide office or advising a Republican campaign, particularly in Minnesota, I would not be on the side of removing mail-in balloting or hindering the ability for Minnesotans to cast a ballot in any of the legal methods in which we can in this state.
Agreed. There are certainly changes that I am for and against recent changes that were made in Minnesota. Do I love unlimited vouching? No. Do I think that driver's license or ID should be shown? Yes. Things that align and do not align with what has been, what is law in Minnesota. But mail-in voting, to me, I use it. I think it's something that does allow busy parents, the elderly, the disabled. I think there's a military, I think, which is a huge, mass generalization, but typically a huge boon for Republicans. There's so much good that comes from mail-in voting, and there are so many things, checks and balances in place to ensure that it is done correctly and properly with minimal fraud. Like you said, there's probably an element of fraud in most elections. We have spoken time and time again that we both believe that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election, so we don't ascribe to that. But I personally stand behind it and was really pleased in 2024 when Republicans got behind this. I think that there was a lot of benefit from it. They did it very well, saying, we need you to vote. Go out and vote. If you can vote in person early, great. If you can vote by mail early, great. If you can vote on the day of the election, awesome. Just vote. And I think that's great. And, when we talk about civic responsibility, I think that it really stands behind a lot of what Republicans and the Constitution stands for of being active participants in the electoral process. When we look at this, and it's kind of an open and shut case too, right? I mean, does the president have power to change voting laws? Short answer, no. The U.S. Constitution says that, quote, times, places, and manners of holding election shall be prescribed in each state of the legislature thereof, or by the legislature thereof. It says Congress has a role to make or alter such regulations, does not specify a role for the president. And most experts are saying right now that Trump cannot tell states how to carry out their 2026 voting. No surprise, Donald Trump disagrees. He posted on social media that under the law that the states, quote, are merely an agent for the federal government in counting and tabulating the votes. He goes on to say they must do what the federal government, as represented by our President of the United States, tells them, in all caps, for the good of our country, to do.
The sound you don't hear right now, I should say, is all the Republicans who are all these small government conservatives who are generally an advocate for states' rights suddenly not being very loud. This is a massive overreach. I cannot imagine the outrage that would be happening right now if Biden or President Obama had done something like this to the degree to which they're just by decree demanding this types of stuff. The outrage, the protest, the anger that we would get. Bottom line is this. I think your analysis is correct. I don't think the president has any authority to do this. We do not have a national election. We have states elections, a variety. We have 50 state elections for president, and they're all administered differently as prescribed in the Constitution. Again, I stand by what I immediately thought of, and I'm kind of hardwired to think this. When the president says this type of stuff, particularly about elections, I think about what's going to happen in this state. I would not advise nor tell a Republican candidate, nor do I think should, running for any office to go out there and say that we should get rid of mail-in balloting in this state. Making it more difficult for Minnesotans to vote is not a platform that which you want to run on. Yes. Do I think that do I agree with you on photo ID? I think photo ID is common sense. And if that's one thing I could change, and someone could make the argument, well, Michael, that would be making it more difficult for people to vote. No, I think it would help. I think it would be a good policy change to help build some additional trust in a system that I already think is very trustworthy and where Minnesotans have a lot of faith. I think Secretary of State Steve Simon does a great job in overseeing our elections. So it's not anything against him. I just have always supported that as kind of just a common sense move. But going out and getting rid of mail-in ballots and then having that be a focal point in the campaign or supporting that as a position, I think is just a terrible policy idea. And I think it's terrible for politics. I think there's not an upside in doing it other than to go along with what the president who said, but based on all accounts, got this idea from Vladimir Putin. I got to tell you something, Becky. Maybe you want that. Maybe you want Vladimir Putin. Maybe you and your family want Vladimir Putin telling you how you want the elections run, but not in the United States of America. I don't want Vladimir Putin doing that. And I guess maybe that makes me different than you, okay?
That's exactly it. And it's just how this man can stand on, I'm against it, I'm for it, I'm against it. Like, how it just boggles my mind. But also, when we look at the 2024 election, especially on the national stage, Republicans were massively successful.
Yes.
So now you're going to go say, I feel like it's just him trying to give himself cover in advance of a potentially tough midterm election, where he's now going to say Democrats only won because they have mail-in ballots. But 2024, when there were still a rise, or more mail-in ballots than prior to the pre-COVID dates, Republicans have majority of the House and the Senate and won the presidency, like, with mail-in ballots. It's just vote, people. Vote by mail if you need to. I will continue to do so.
What would you do if you were the state party? Would you continue to invest in mail-in balloting programs? If you were a candidate, let's say someone's going to run for Secretary of State, candidates are now announcing getting in. I think it's a reasonable question to ask. Do you support mail-in balloting? As the president, he put down a pretty big line in the sand.
I don't believe the state party has the money to put into a for or against mail-in balloting themselves on this. But no, I would not advise that. I mean, if you, again, how it happens, it's going to continue to erode the trust in our election process. And so you have Joe Schmo, Joe Sixpack,
You
one
mean
from
if you take mail-in balloting away?
just this questioning of it again. You know, you have this individual who in 2024, you know, from Roseau or from Eden Prairie or wherever you're from, heard President Donald Trump say, please vote any means possible. They were working that day. They had children. They didn't have the way to get to the polls, whatever their reasoning, or just like me, you're busy and just wanted to vote and get it, stop the calls and the text messages earlier than necessary. So they were told in 2024 to do that. They voted that way. Now they're being told not to. They have the same potential hurdles preventing them to go on election day. Are they just now going to not go home or not stay home and not vote? Because now President Trump is saying don't vote by mail. If they don't have the possibility or interest or desire to get there on election day, they're not going to vote. Now, that's my concern is now we have these individuals that are going to hear this and say, well, my president tells me not to trust mail-in ballots, so I'm not going to do that. And therefore, if I can't get to the polls or I don't really care that much to get to the polls, I'm not going to vote. And this is going to hurt Republicans up and down the ballot.
Absolutely. Setting aside your support for Vladimir Putin and his wishes that are going on, I think one of the best points that you made, of many good points you made, but I think this is the best point you made. Republicans cleaned up in 2024.
Yeah.
Why would you mess with a field operation, a grassroots operation that delivered to the degree which it did? I mean, we were there and we were doing the live stream. Republicans have the House, they have the Senate, and they have the presidency. Why would you throw a wrench in the operation that delivered that? Makes no sense to me.
Makes no sense to me. And
But
it's just a complete decimates the tens of millions, $16 million spent in Pennsylvania in 2024 promoting mail voting.
I guess that's what makes me different. Unlike me, I don't listen to Vladimir Putin like you do, so I guess that makes me different. So that's the big difference.
I got nothing else.
All right. Well, no, we have a big opening this week.
Oh, we do. Minnesota State Fair, the Great Minnesota Get Together, kicks off this week. Are you going?
I'll go at least once, if not twice, and I love to eat there. I absolutely love the Minnesota State Fair.
I love it too. I don't know that we're going to get there this year. Having a 3-month-old and a 3-year-old, the thought of pushing a stroller and having a toddler that runs at the fair. My husband and I talked about it this week. We think next year we need to take a day off so we can go a weekday because weekends are just too overwhelming to me, especially having a stroller and a very fast toddler.
Becky, kids basically raise themselves these days, from what I understand. What I'm reading,
I'll just put them on leashes. We're good.
Just throw them. Put the learning box on the TV set. Slap an iPad there. Juice boxes. Make sure everything.
Perfect.
Make sure everything's kid proof. You can take some time and go.
I love it. We'll need a full recap of everything any new food you have, what's good, what you like.
Absolutely. Before we go, I want to remind our listeners that I'm going to be posting on social media. You can join the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky's Pick'em League. Becky is rumored to be back.
Whoop, whoop.
This is going to be a big year. I won the first season without an asterisk, and Becky fully won last year's. And so with the support of Vladimir Putin, I think she's back in this year, and we'll see how the teams go. But it's going to be a great season on the Pick'em League, and we hope everyone can participate, okay?
Can't wait.
I want to thank everyone for joining us for this episode of the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before you go, show us some of your favorite podcasts by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or on the platform where you listen. You can follow us on our website and across all social media platforms at BBBreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be back next week. Thank you so much for joining us.
Bye-bye.